In the year 1415, a familiar shadow loomed once again over the fields of northern France. English troops, hardened by years of war, marched under the banner of St. George. They had crossed the Channel not for defense, but for conquest. Their young king, determined and commanding, believed the French crown was his by right. The long and bitter struggle, known as the 100 Years' War, was entering a new and decisive phase. But this war, which had already spanned generations, did not begin with him. It had been ignited decades earlier in 1337, when Edward III of England laid claim to the throne of France, challenging the legitimacy of the ruling Valois dynasty. Since then, England and France had been locked in a seesawing conflict of sieges, truces, and occasional victories, a dynastic struggle that would stretch the resources of both kingdoms and define the lives of their rulers. By the turn of the 15th century, the war had stalled. England had lost most of its territorial gains in France. At home, the crown itself was unstable, passed not through peaceful succession, but through political upheaval and rebellion. In 1399, Henry Bolingbroke, son of John of Gaunt and grandson of Edward III, returned from exile to depose his cousin, King Richard II. Bolingbroke took the throne as Henry IV, but his claim, rooted more in strength than law, left lingering doubts over the legitimacy of his rule. Henry IV's reign was marked by turmoil. The kingdom was fractured, the monarchy weakened, and trust in royal leadership uncertain. Yet amidst this unrest, one figure was steadily rising: his son, Henry of Monmouth. Born into a realm in political crisis and raised in a court divided, young Henry would watch his father battle for control of a kingdom he had seized by force. But before the victories, before the crown, and before the legendary Battle of Agincourt, there was a child born during the storms of rebellion, shaped by war, scarred by conflict, and destined to become one of England's greatest warrior kings. This is the story of Henry V of England, not just the king made famous by Shakespeare, but the real man behind the legend. Henry of Monmouth, the future King Henry V, was born on September 16, 1386, in the market town of Monmouth, nestled on the border between England and Wales. His birthplace, Monmouth Castle, would lend him the name by which he was known in his early years, Henry of Monmouth. He was the firstborn son of Henry Bolingbroke, then the Earl of Derby, and his wife Mary de Beauhun, a noblewoman descended from powerful English aristocratic families. Through his father, Henry was a direct male-line descendant of Edward III, which gave the family a strong dynastic claim to the English throne. Through his mother, he inherited ties to the great baronial house of Beauhun, bringing prestige and land to the Lancastrian cause. Mary de Beauhun was a young woman of noble birth, but she would never live to see her son crowned king. She died in 1394, likely due to complications from childbirth when Henry was still a small child. Her death left young Henry motherless, and he was soon placed in the care of tutors and guardians, as his father continued to rise in political prominence and eventual opposition to the reigning monarch Richard II. Henry's early years were marked by education and preparation for noble life. He was educated in languages, theology, military training, and statecraft. But his life changed dramatically in 1399 when his father returned from exile and deposed Richard II. Bolingbroke took the throne by force and was crowned Henry IV, the first king of the House of Lancaster. At just 13 years old, Henry of Monmouth was elevated from the son of a nobleman to the Prince of Wales, Duke of Cornwall, and Earl of Chester, traditional titles of the heir to the English throne. His new status also came with new responsibilities. Unlike many royal heirs who were kept at a distance from military affairs, Henry was soon thrust into the center of national conflict. One of the most pressing threats to Henry IV's rule came from Wales, where Owain Glyndwr had declared himself Prince of Wales and launched a major rebellion against English rule. The conflict would become one of the most serious domestic threats of the Lancastrian reign, and it was here that young Henry gained his first real taste of command and war. The revolt spread rapidly across Wales. Castles fell, towns were sacked, and English garrisons struggled to contain the uprising. To the Lancastrian crown, Glyndwr was a rebel. but to many in Wales, he was a symbol of national pride and resistance. Still in his mid-teens, he was sent by his father to the Welsh marches to help command royal forces. From his base at Chester and later Shrewsbury, Henry took an active role in the campaigns against the rebels. The war in Wales was not a series of grand battles, but a brutal and exhausting guerrilla conflict, ambushes, sieges, and attrition. Glyndwr proved a clever and resourceful leader, uniting local support and exploiting the terrain to his advantage. Despite years of campaigning, the English struggled to stamp out resistance completely. In 1403, rebellion against Henry IV erupted again, this time not from Wales, but from within England itself. The powerful Percy family, led by Henry Hotspur Percy, once loyal allies of the king, rose in defiance, joining forces with the Welsh rebels and others discontented with the Lancastrian rule. Their uprising led to one of the defining battles of the early 15th century, the Battle of Shrewsbury. On July 21, 1403, the forces of King Henry IV and his son confronted the rebels near Shrewsbury. It was the first time an English army, led by a reigning monarch and his heir, faced another English army in open battle since the Norman conquest. The battle was fierce and chaotic. The rebel longbowmen inflicted heavy losses on the royal troops, and for a time the outcome hung in the balance. During the fighting, the young Prince Henry, leading from the front, was struck in the face by an arrow that penetrated deep near his cheekbone, a wound that could easily have been fatal. Despite his injury, Henry refused to leave the field. He continued to direct his men, and by day's end, the royal army had prevailed. Hotspur was killed in the fighting, and the rebellion collapsed. Surgeons later removed the arrowhead from Henry's face with a makeshift instrument, leaving a permanent scar, a mark that would become both legend and symbol of his endurance. The victory at Shrewsbury secured Henry IV's throne, but the years that followed were not kind to the king. His health began to deteriorate, and his reign continued to be troubled by financial strain, rebellion, and distrust among his nobles. As his father's condition worsened, Prince Henry increasingly took on responsibilities in government and military affairs. He sat on the royal council and helped manage the kingdom's administration. However, tension soon grew between father and son. Henry IV, suspicious of his heir's growing influence and ambition, sidelined him from political power, replacing him for a time with his younger brother, Thomas, Duke of Clarence. By 1413, King Henry IV's health had reached its end. According to chroniclers, he suffered a collapse at Westminster Abbey and was carried to a chamber in the Jerusalem Chapel, where he died on March 20, 1413. With his death, the crown passed to his eldest son, Henry of Monmouth. On April 9, 1413, Prince Henry was crowned King Henry V of England in Westminster Abbey, who was just 25 years old. His coronation was held amid heavy rain, which many took as a sign of cleansing and renewal after years of political unrest. When Henry was crowned king, the realm he inherited was far from peaceful. The kingdom had been strained by rebellion, division, and years of uncertain leadership under his father Henry IV. The first months of Henry's reign revealed a ruler very different from the man he had once been rumored to be. In his youth, the prince's reputation had suffered from tales of indulgence and restlessness during his father's reign. But upon taking the throne, Henry showed neither recklessness nor excess. Instead, he displayed a disciplined, serious, and methodical approach to governance. Henry understood that the legitimacy of his dynasty, the House of Lancaster, was still questioned by some, since his father had seized the crown through deposition rather than inheritance. To secure the throne fully, Henry had to unite a divided realm. He began by reaching out to former enemies. Henry ordered the remains of Richard II to be exhumed from their resting place at King's Langley and reburied with full royal honours at Westminster Abbey beside his first wife, Anne of Bohemia. Henry also sought peace within his nobility. Many of the lords who had risen against his father were pardoned and restored to favour. He also surrounded himself with experienced advisors, men who shared his sense of duty and order. At the same time, Henry worked to strengthen the monarchy's moral authority. He presented himself as a model Christian ruler, attending daily religious services, funding church restorations, and promoting the clergy's influence in governance. But Henry's religious devotion was also uncompromising. He viewed threats to the church as threats to the stability of the kingdom itself. The Lollard movement, followers of the reformer John Wycliffe, had been spreading ideas that challenged the authority of both the Pope and the clergy. At the start of his reign, a group of Lollards led by Sir John Oldcastle, once a companion and close associate of Henry from his days as Prince of Wales, rose in rebellion. In January 1414, Henry personally ordered the suppression of the Lollard uprising. The revolt was swiftly crushed near St. Giles Fields in London. Dozens were executed, and Oldcastle himself went into hiding. At home, Henry's leadership style soon won him respect. He called Parliament early in his reign, listening to petitions and addressing grievances that had gone unanswered under his father. By 1414, the internal peace of England had begun to return. The Welsh uprising that had plagued his father's rule was over, the nobles were largely reconciled, and the Lollard threat had been contained. Yet Henry knew that peace alone would not secure the Lancastrian legacy. Across the Channel, France was in turmoil. King Charles VI suffered from recurring madness, leaving his realm divided between two powerful factions: the Armagnacs, supporters of the French royal family, and the Burgundians, led by the ambitious Duke of Burgundy. Their rivalry had torn France apart, creating a power vacuum that invited opportunity. For Henry, that opportunity was nothing less than the recovery of the English claim to the French crown, a claim first asserted by his great-grandfather Edward III, more than 70 years earlier at the beginning of the 100 Years' War. The English claim rested on blood. Edward III's mother, Isabella of France, had been the daughter of King Philip IV. When the French crown passed to a cousin rather than through the female line, Edward asserted his own right to rule France by descent, igniting decades of war. Those early conquests had once made England dominant on the continent, but by the late 14th century, most of those territories had been lost. Henry now sought to reclaim that legacy. He believed his claim was legitimate and that France's weakness offered England a rare moment to press it. In the spring of 1414, Henry sent envoys to France to negotiate peace. His demands were sweeping. He insisted on recognition of his right to the French throne, as well as the restoration of English lands once held under Edward III, including Normandy, Anjou, Touraine, and Aquitaine. The French, unwilling to surrender such vast territory, countered with far lesser offers: marriage to King Charles's daughter, Catherine of Valois, and a dowry of 600,000 crowns. But Henry's ambitions went beyond marriage alliances and monetary compensation. The negotiations collapsed. By the end of 1414, England was preparing for war. War required resources, and Henry approached the task with precision. The king ordered ships to be built and repaired, supplies gathered, and men recruited from every shire of England. By the summer of 1415, a formidable army composed of knights, men-at-arms, and longbowmen had assembled at Southampton. But before the fleet could set sail, a dangerous conspiracy was uncovered, one that threatened to destroy Henry's campaign before it even began. The Southampton plot was a scheme to assassinate the king and replace him with Edmund Mortimer, 5th Earl of March, a nobleman descended from the older legitimate branch of the Plantagenet line through Lionel of Antwerp, Duke of Clarence. The conspirators, Richard, Earl of Cambridge, Henry Scrope, and Sir Thomas Grey, hoped to overthrow the Lancastrian line and restore what they considered the rightful heir to the throne. But fate was not on their side. Mortimer himself, upon learning of the plot, revealed it to the king. The conspirators were immediately arrested, tried for treason, and executed within days. With the conspiracy crushed and the realm secure, Henry turned his full attention to the campaign. In August 1415, he and his army, some 12,000 strong, boarded ships at Southampton and set sail across the Channel toward Normandy. On August 13, 1415, the English army landed near Harfleur. The invasion of France had begun. His first target was the port city of Harfleur, strategically located at the mouth of the River Seine. Whoever controlled Harfleur controlled the main approach to the heart of Normandy. The Siege of Harfleur began on August 18, 1415. English cannons bombarded the town's walls day and night, while archers and men-at-arms pressed the attack. The defenders responded with arrows, stones, and boiling oil. The siege dragged on far longer than Henry had planned. Weeks turned into months. For Henry, this was not simply a military effort, it was a test of will and divine favor. After more than a month of siege, with their walls shattered and their supplies gone, the defenders of Harfleur finally surrendered on September 22, 1415. Henry showed mercy. The surviving townspeople were ordered to leave, and an English garrison took control of the city. Harfleur was now in English hands, but the cost was severe. The army had lost thousands to sickness and exhaustion, and the campaign season was nearly over. Most commanders would have returned home to rest and regroup. Henry chose otherwise. He resolved to march north, across hundreds of miles of enemy territory, to the English stronghold of Calais. It was a daring and dangerous move. Meanwhile, French forces gathered in great numbers. The French nobles, furious at the invasion, assembled a massive army, perhaps 20,000 to 30,000 men, compared to Henry's mere 6,000. On October 25, 1415, the two armies faced each other at Agincourt. The French, confident in victory, expected to sweep aside the weary English. Their knights were heavily armored, their numbers overwhelming. Henry arranged his men carefully. He positioned his archers, armed with the famous English longbow on either flank, protected by wooden stakes. The French advanced through the narrow, rain-soaked field. The ground, churned by horses and men, became a mire. Heavy armor weighed the knights down as English arrows rained upon them. The French ranks faltered, then fell into chaos. Their formations collapsed under their own weight, and thousands were crushed or suffocated in the mud. By midday, the battle was over. The English had triumphed against staggering odds. The victory was total. Thousands of French nobles were dead or captured. The Battle of Agincourt transformed Henry's image from that of a capable monarch into that of a legendary warrior king. When Henry returned to England in November 1415, he was hailed as a hero. The victory at Agincourt united the nation, strengthened the crown, and silenced doubts about the Lancastrian dynasty. In 1417, Henry launched his second invasion of France. This time, it was systematic and relentless. Town after town in Normandy fell to English forces. By 1419, Henry controlled most of the duchy, including the city of Rouen, which surrendered after a brutal siege. France, already divided by internal conflict, was collapsing. The Burgundians, bitter rivals of the Armagnac faction, sought peace with Henry. Negotiations followed, and in 1420 they culminated in one of the most extraordinary treaties of the Middle Ages, the Treaty of Troyes. Under the Treaty of Troyes, King Charles VI of France recognized Henry V as his heir and regent. Henry married Catherine of Valois, Charles's daughter, sealing the alliance. The agreement effectively disinherited the Dauphin, the rightful French heir, and declared that upon Charles VI's death, the crowns of England and France would be united under Henry and his descendants. By 1421, King Henry V had achieved what no English monarch before him had ever done. Henry and his heirs would inherit both kingdoms, uniting England and France under a single ruler. It was the greatest diplomatic and military triumph in English medieval history. But even at the height of his power, Henry's ambitions demanded constant effort. Much of France remained loyal to the Dauphin Charles, the disinherited son of Charles VI, who refused to accept the Treaty of Troyes. In December of that same year, Catherine gave birth to their only child, a son Henry, born at Windsor Castle on December 6, 1421. Even as his son was born, Henry was already back in France, leading a new campaign to secure the territories promised to him under the treaty. The Dauphinist forces loyal to the French heir had begun reclaiming ground in the Loire Valley. Henry's brother Thomas, Duke of Clarence, had attempted to suppress them but was killed at the Battle of Beaujais in March 1421. Determined to avenge his brother and complete the conquest, Henry returned to France with renewed vigor. The summer was harsh, and disease once again swept through the army. By June, Henry fell ill, likely from dysentery. On August 31st, 1422, at just 35 years old, Henry V died. His final words were said to be a prayer for his son and his kingdoms. "Into thy hands, Lord, I commend my spirit." Henry's body was carried first to Rouen, then across the Channel to England, where he was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey. When Henry V died, his son Henry VI was not yet a year old. The infant king was now the ruler of both England and, by treaty, France. No king before or after would ever match his courage, his discipline, or his glory. Henry V, the greatest warrior king England ever knew,